questions or no? Okay, thanks. I take it that was you, Stuart, who started it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, jot down any questions, thoughts that you have, and then probably at the end we'll have a chance where we can ask some questions and share our thoughts on the topic. So let me share my screen. Okay, I will make that a bit bigger. Slideshow. Okay. Can anybody not see that blue slide on your screen? I'll take silence as being everyone can see it.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Okay. So, scientism. Can science disprove God? Before we get into that, like I said, I want to show you this very simple way in which we can share the gospel with someone. And each of the weeks that we do this, we're going to use this gospel sharing technique to, at the end, to use it to help us speak the gospel into the worldviews that we'll be talking about. So don't worry about all the Bible verses there for the time being. But so if ever you want to share the gospel with someone, here's a simple way to do it. God's design. Okay, God created the world and it was very good. All right. Problem was then sin entered the world. Okay, and that sin caused brokenness within creation itself. It caused brokenness between humans, and it caused brokenness between God and humans. And this brokenness, it sort of, went out into all parts of human life. No part of human life is untouched by this brokenness. But the good news is that if we repent and believe in the gospel, God heals the brokenness that exists between us and him. And he does this through the death and resurrection of Christ on our behalf. And as that repairs our relationship with God, it helps us to recover and pursue God's original good design for us as day by day we grow to be more like his son, until the day where we're back in the perfect world in the age to come. But as we learn all of this, I would like to add in an extra line that's not on this chart from the circle here, but where it says God's good design. Once we know all this, God sends us back out into the world so we can bring this same message of hope to others. So that's just a very simple way you can share the gospel. 3 main points: God's good design, brokenness, and the gospel, finishing back up at God's good design again. What I might do now, I'll pray. And as I pray, I might just get everyone to mute your microphones if you don't mind. And if you want to ask a question as we move through, that's fine. Just unmute yourself to ask. Otherwise, I will have a time at the end for any questions or comments. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for your gospel. Thank you that your gospel has been at work in our lives, bringing us to repentance and faith. And Lord, I pray that you would use my words tonight, Lord, to bring you glory, to build our faith, and help give us confidence in sharing our faith with others. In Lord Jesus' name, amen. All right, so let's move on to, actually, before that, let's think about what is scientism, and I'll give you a definition. Scientism is the excessive belief in the power of scientific knowledge and technique applied to all areas of investigation. Okay, so it's the excessive belief in the power of scientific knowledge and technique applied to all areas of investigation. Now, if we think about that for a moment, I'd like us to consider, not just this week, but each week with the different worldviews we're going to be looking at, is think about, what is this worldview trying to achieve? It may be trying to achieve good ends, maybe through misguided means, or it might be trying to achieve nefarious ends. Does anyone have any thoughts on those who hold to this scientism philosophy? What do you think they might be trying to achieve by doing so? Like I said, it might be good, something good, might be something not so good. What do you think they're trying to achieve? There's no right or wrong answer.
To have a rational explanation for how things in the world are. And
okay, yep, thanks, Ellie. Any other thoughts?
I think also a material explanation.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Yep.
And I think some, go on.
That science can ultimately solve the world's problems.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. Yep.
That's, I think, what I was going to say, that humans want some degree of control over their world and over their life.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Beth.
I think also it's sort of seen as the epitome of truth. So if it can be proven rationally and scientifically, then it's definitely true. And if it can't, well, then maybe we can't know if that is true or not.
Yes, thank you, Bryce.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, everyone. I don't have much to add to that. I think you've covered it well. I think that's what they're trying to achieve, perhaps with good intentions. But let's. But I think we need to be clear that science is great. It really is. But science has got limitations. Science is really limited to the natural created realm. And it's been very helpful for us in understanding God's creation. But science is a natural discipline, which means being a natural discipline, it cannot prove or disprove anything in the supernatural realm. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about God and our Lord Jesus. We're talking the supernatural realm, which is an area that good science, it can't speak to, because, good science speaks to the natural realm, not the supernatural one. So how can we, what can we do to prove the existence of God? If science isn't the be all and end all for us in that regard, what can we do? I'm going to come back to the topic of science soon, but I'm going to step away for it from just a moment. I think the first thing that we can do, if someone says to us, well, how can you prove your God exists? We can point to our own life experience, first and foremost. We enjoy the effects of God's presence. So we live in the great universe created by God. We live on the wonderful planet created by God. We see the existence of good in this world. People will come at us and say, well, if God is all loving and all powerful, why is there evil in the world? Okay, and that's a fair question. I don't blame anyone for asking that question at all. But I think what they need to answer is, well, if God didn't create everything, if it all just came about by chance and random luck and evolution, which is survival of the fittest, how do you explain when people act from altruistic motives? That is putting their own survival instincts second so they can do something good for someone else. You know, they need to be able to explain where that came from. And the existence of good in our world, to my way of thinking, is evidence of a good God who gives everyone access to what we call his common grace. Okay. And I think also we can point to God's work in our lives. Last Wednesday, we had a wonderful session online where a bunch of us shared our testimony on the work God has done in our life. That's something that no one can say is not true or didn't happen. You know, we happen to know that it did. You know, we see the effects of living in God's world, the good effects of living in God's world. We can't see God, we can't hear God, we can't touch God, but we can see the effects of living in his world. And that there's other things that we believe in that we can't see, that we can't hear, that we can't touch. We believe in the existence of love. We can't see love, hear it, or smell it, but we can feel love's effect in our life. Oxygen, okay, we can't see oxygen. We can't smell it. Actually, we can't see it. We can't touch it. We can't hear it. All right. But we know it's there because we have the effect. We know the effect of oxygen in our life. We can breathe. We're not dead. So we know oxygen is there. Also, you can think about gravity. You know, we can't see gravity. We can't touch gravity. We can't hear gravity, but we know it's there because we're not all floating off into the atmosphere. So it is possible and it is rational to believe in things that you can't see, you can't hear, and you can't touch. Okay, God is one of those things, but it is rational to believe, even though we can't see him, hear him, or touch him, because we experience the effects of God in this world. The second thing I'd like to say is that, and it's related to God's presence in our life, is that he is our friend and our helper. Okay, and you know, this matches up beautifully what's written in the Word of God itself. Psalm 54, save me, O God, by your name. Vindicate me by your might. Hear my prayer, O God. Listen to the words of my mouth. Arrogant foes are attacking me. Ruthless people are trying to kill me. People without regard for God. Surely God is my help. The Lord is the one who sustains me. I think those of us that were present last week when we were doing our mini testimony training, we'll have seen how God has helped some of us in quite extraordinary ways through our life. So we know God is there because of the impact he's had in our life. And from Hebrews chapter 13, we read, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? And time again, we see the word of God play out in our lives. And we can only stand in awe of God for that. And time again, that presence of God in our life points us back to the truth of his existence. It's not something science can do, because God is supernatural and science is natural. Yet our life experience of God can. What we're going to do now, we're going to talk a little bit about what science can and cannot do when it comes to proving or disproving God. Now, the first thing we're going to do is watch this really interesting little video I found on YouTube. Now, this is going to test my technological skills to the absolute maximum. All right. I'm going to try and play this, screen share this YouTube video. Now, this may not work in the recording if it's copyrighted or something, but we'll see it now.
You might have to enable the sound on it.
Yeah, I will. So just bear with me for just a moment, everyone. And this will be a good time if you do have that pen or piece of paper handy. There's 6 main points that this video brings up. So I think it would be really helpful for you if you can jot down those points. Now, can anyone not see the black screen in front of them? Can everyone see it? If you can, just shout out yes for me.
Yeah.
Was it? Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Fantastic. We're cooking with juice here. All right. Let me hit the play button, and I'll take a breather for 6 minutes while we watch this together.
Socrates once stated that we should follow the argument wherever it leads. When we look at the most profound question of life, does God exist? We should certainly follow his advice. When we do, we'll find evidences that show us God is real. Let's look at 6 proofs that show God exists. Number 1, the universe must have a cause. The most fundamental law of science is the law of cause and effect. And it says that for every material effect we see, there is a cause that came before it or was simultaneous to it, and that is greater than it. The universe is a material effect. So what caused the universe? You see, if you don't believe in a creator, then you have to suggest something like a singularity. That's what is popular today, that there was some type of singularity that exploded in something called the Big Bang. But then when you try to get down to the bottom of what's a singularity, well, what we hear from the scientific community that suggests to us, the cosmologists, they say, well, a singularity was something that popped into existence from nothing. Do you know that if there ever were a time when there was nothing, that's exactly what we would have now? The idea that something popped into existence from nothing is simply not a scientific idea. You see, they're suggesting that that singularity is somehow natural, but it behaves supernaturally. They say that that singularity wouldn't have followed the laws of nature. Well, then, so what are we left with? We're left with the fact that the universe had a beginning, and it was not a natural cause. It was something above nature. It was something super nature, something supernatural. And so when we see the material effect of the universe, we can know that there was a supernatural creator that caused the universe. Proof number 2, design demands a designer. It is a truism that everybody recognizes that this universe looks designed. In fact, when we see the various different aspects of nature, and we see birds and squirrels and trees, and we see all of the things that they do so well, many times we as humans, we try to copy and mimic that design, but often we don't do nearly as well as the design that we see in nature. We look at the design of the human body and the human hand and the arm and the leg and the brain, and we see that those are some of the most advanced, technologically savvy pieces of equipment ever put together, and we try to mimic them and copy them, and we can't do it as well. Why? Because this universe exhibits design from the starry sky at night to the fingertips on your hand. The design is overwhelming. It's everywhere. Where does design originate? Well, what you and I both know is that when you see things that function and they're complex, that design comes from an intelligent designer. Big explosions just simply don't bring about order. They don't cause things that are functional and complex to come into existence. The design we see in the universe demands a supernatural, intelligent designer. Proof number 3. Life demands a supernatural life giver. You see, in the material world, we have come to understand that there is a law of biology called the law of biogenesis. Law of biogenesis simply says this, that in this material, natural world, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind. Now, when we look at how people used to think about life, they said, no, life can arise spontaneously from non-living chemicals. And yet every single biological experiment has shown us that that simply is biologically impossible. Life doesn't arise from non-living chemicals. From where did life arise? Where did life originate if it doesn't arise from non-living chemicals? You see, the idea that there's no God suggests to us that there had to be some singularity without a cause that exploded, and that explosion brought about design, which we've never ever seen happen, and then ultimately somewhere the non-living chemicals gave rise to life. But that's biologically impossible. Life demands a supernatural creator. Proof number 4. Moral law demands a moral law giver. If some things are objectively morally right and other things are objectively morally wrong, then there must be a God. You see, if we evolved from primordial slime over multiplied millions of years, at what point did objective moral values arise? We don't look at a dog and say that that dog objectively, morally violated some rule when he steals a bone from another dog. We don't say, hey, he violated a objective moral value. We just don't say that. But we do say that humans can perpetrate things that are objectively morally wrong, that humans can be involved in things that are morally right. If that's true, there must be a God. Proof number 5, free will exists. The atheistic idea that there is no God is founded on the idea of materialism, the idea that this material world is all that there is, all that there was, and all that there ever will be. Because of that, atheism has to suggest that you as a person don't really have free will, that there is no being inside of your body or brain that is supermatter, that really what's going on in your brain is just electrons bouncing around and you're the product of those bounces, and you don't really make decisions on your own. It's just the physical laws and properties going on in your brain. If you are watching this video of your own volition, then the fact of the matter is there has to be a God that can account for that free will that you as a person have. There has to be a God if there is free will. And proof number 6, human reasoning. You see, we reason on a regular basis. We understand abstract ideas. If we were products of blind, chance, random processes over multiplied millions of years, reasoning and the laws of reasoning simply would have no explanation. And yet we reason together on a regular basis. From where does reason arise? It's got no naturalistic, atheistic explanation. Antony Flew, the atheist who wrote Theology and Falsification, the most popular atheistic paper for the last 100 years, the last century. In 2006, he co-wrote a book titled There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. He stated that his rule of life had always been to follow the evidence where it leads. And he said he followed that evidence. And it led him to the conclusion that there is a supernatural, intelligent God. Let's let the evidence lead us to that same conclusion.
Okay. Folks, I'll just get you to keep your screen muted if that's all right. But what I'd like to do is I'd still like to have a little discussion on that video, maybe just for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move on. Again, I'm not by any means an expert on all this stuff, and I'll invite Bryce if you want to jump in on any of this. Feel free to do so, brother. But did anything he say particularly resonate with anybody? Just unmute yourself and feel free to.
The free will one, Steve.
Yeah.
Because we do have free will.
Yeah.
My son once said to me, so you're telling me, Mum, that I don't have any free will, that I only be good by chance? I said, no. God gave you free will, Scott. And that's why you choose to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. He
Yeah.
argued that we aren't given free will by God.
Okay.
Mm.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, is there anyone else?
I think the way he was talking about God being supernatural, as in not of nature, would be the thing that would strike people, because people want answers in nature, answers that they can relate to, as we said before, science, where you can prove things.
Yeah.
So I think that was a good point.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything you'd like to offer?
I recall watching once a David Attenborough documentary where he pointed to the fact that if you look at nature, it has a design, just like a watch has a design. And he praised Mother Nature for her design.
Yeah. It's like praising the watch for its design, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Bryce, it's okay if you have nothing to say, but did you have anything you wanted to add to any of that?
Yeah, I think there was a few things. I think something that's interesting on that last point was often a lot of the times my lecturers at university, obviously they're biology, physical chemistry and whatnot, they're quite atheistic, but they'd always slip and say design, especially in biology, and they'll say the cell is well designed, that it does this, and I always find that was quite interesting. I think going back to the free will argument, I think often the atheistic kind of, or the scientist point of view is it's just governed by chemical laws and processes, and therefore we don't have free will, which I find is quite interesting, because then you just say, well, then I have no free will to believe otherwise, and you have no free will to, so there's no point in talking, there's no point in discussing. And then I think that kind of breaks people out of the, sort of reductio ad absurdum, showing them how absurd their position is. And I think for me personally, one of the biggest things that always stands out is the moral argument. Science is inherently amoral. It's not immoral and it's not moral. It just shows you, it's a tool to show you how things work. Like nuclear fission, for example. It just says that if you, set off an uncontrolled nuclear fission, you'll get a nuclear explosion. It doesn't say anything about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just sort of explains the event and gives you the information, about that. So I think that's a big point, is science can't determine morals. It's outside. As we sort of say, there's a moral law that is outside of nature itself. It's objective. It's we identify this from God. And I think that is a big issue with scientism, is where do you get your morals from if you can't prove them using science or rationalism?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thanks, Bryce. All right, let me share my screen again. Okay. How come I can't see everyone now? Okay. Okay.
This is the minimized.
That's all right. Can everyone see my screen okay? We're back to the slides. If I could hear a couple of yeses.
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Now, so I'm going to pick up on a few of the things that the guy talked about in that video. Not all of it, but a few of them. So the first proof we talked about that God exists was our life. We experience the effects of God in our life. Okay, so that was number one. Okay, but the second, I don't know if I'd say it's a proof but what points to God is science itself. Now, science can't, like I said, can't prove or disprove God because science is natural, God is supernatural. But there are actually some things which science has showed us which points to an intelligent designer of the universe. And so piece of evidence one is whatever has a beginning has a cause. Now, science tells us, to the best of my understanding, that the universe did have a beginning. But what science can't explain is what was the first cause of that beginning. Now, we're talking about the creation of the universe here and everything that's in it. So whatever created the universe must be outside of time, space, and matter, physical energy itself. And as we think about that, we think, that sounds a lot like how the Bible presents God. In other words, here's a logical argument for this piece of evidence. Okay, so we start off with whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. I don't think many people would argue that. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause for existence. Again, my understanding is this is a scientific principle. Okay, whatever exists must have a cause for its existence. Science tells us that the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe must have a cause for its existence. Okay, so the universe, whatever begins to exist must have a cause. All right, the universe began to exist, therefore there must be a cause for the universe's existence. And the attributes for this cause of the universe being timeless, existing outside of space and so on, as I said before, are very much like the attributes of God as presented in the Bible. Therefore, taking all of this into account, the cause of the universe must be God. And when we run a rule through the Bible, this is exactly what the Bible tells us. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Now, to my way of thinking, from what science has learned to this point in time about the creation of the universe, I think the Bible is actually filling in quite nicely what science can't answer. Yet, science still knows it needs that answer. So in this case, I think science is pointing to an intelligent designer, and the Bible tells us who that intelligent designer is. All right. Now, so that's evidence number one. Under science, whatever has a beginning has a cause. Okay. Evidence number two we'll think about is the origin of life itself, particularly DNA. I believe the information in a cell of a tiny, I can never pronounce this properly, amoeba, I think it is, which is a unicellular organism. Okay, the amount of information in the cell of an amoeba is greater than the entire set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, that's that comes from Richard Dawkins. You know, what one of the cheerleaders when it comes to trying to get God out of our society. He himself says, you know, these tiny single cell organisms have more information than the entire set of Encyclopedia Britannica. Thing is, human DNA has vastly more than a single cell amoeba. Humans have trillions of cells, with each one containing 3 billion pairs of DNA. I got that from a Harvard uni website. You know, and human DNA, it processes information. DNA is basically a biological source of information. And my understanding is information always comes from a greater intelligence. So where did the universe start? How did the universe start? Science can't answer that, nor can it answer the origin of life itself. It needs an intelligent designer to create life. Because like the guy said in the video, if you start with nothing, fast forward a few hundred years or more, you'll still have nothing. Okay, life has to come from somewhere. Take this illustration, it may be helpful. There's 2 patterns on a beach. You know, one pattern is formed by waves, the other is formed by words. Okay, the words might read John loves Mary or something like that. You'll see the random waves that come in will form a random pattern. Yeah, but the words are clearly from an intelligent origin, communicating a message. The human body and our DNA cell structure is so amazingly complex, but we cannot have been randomly created. The chances of that happening are so astonishingly small, it's not even worth considering. The very makeup of a human and our cell structure screams of an intelligent designer, that being God. It's like the example Stuart used before about the watch. You know, you don't look at a watch and think, wow, that's amazing how it designed itself. You know, you look at a watch and you think, gosh, you know, whoever designed this watch must be a pretty skillful craftsman. You know, it takes a greater leap of faith to think that life comes from nothing than comes from intelligent designer. So far, our evidence for God's existence is our lives. Secondly, science itself, and under that we have whatever has a beginning has a cause. And also under science we have evidence too, is the origin of life itself had to have come from a greater source of information, being God. The third bit of evidence under the science banner would be our world and our universe is fine-tuned to support life. Let me tell you this story. You're walking through the woods and you happen to stumble upon a cottage, a cabin, okay? And you walk into this cabin and your favorite DVDs are on the table for you. Your favorite drink is in the fridge. Your favorite books are on the bookcase. Everything is set up just how you like it. What would you think? Would you think it's just random? Or is it possible that someone who knew you really well set up that cabin ready for you to arrive? The planet Earth is very much like that. Paul Davies, who I believe is one of the leading physicists, he writes that in relation to the other forces in nature, gravity must be fine-tuned to 1 part to 10 to the 40. So that's 10 with 40 zeros after it. I think I read in another book, someone actually also said 10 to the 60. It just shows that this world is perfectly designed to support life. This as well from Stephen Hawking. He writes, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. Now, I can't even get my head around that, but clearly, again, it shows how amazingly fine-tuned the universe and our world is to support life. And a final fun fact that I'll share is there are 19 universal constants that must be perfectly fine-tuned to support life as we know it. Now, that's absolutely incredible. For the universe and our world to be fine-tuned so much so that life can be sustained as we know it, it sounds absolutely crazy to think it all happened by random chance and accident. I read something about when Richard Dawkins was pressed on questions such as the origin of life and the fine-tuning of our universe. He's a really smart guy. And like I said, he's one of the physicists that are one of the new atheists who are, you know, quite evangelistic, if you like, with trying to cure people of faith. When he was pushed on this, he had no answer, and he said, well, you know, it's just luck. I admire his faith. It takes a great deal of faith to believe that something can be so perfectly fine-tuned and it just comes down to good old-fashioned dumb luck. It's like if you see an amazing work of art, let's think of the Mona Lisa by what's his name? Leonardo. It's not DiCaprio. It's the other Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. You know, it's like looking at his Mona Lisa and thinking it came about by him just picking up some tins of paint and just dumping them on the canvas. Now, of course it didn't. The painting was fine-tuned by a skilled artist. Or it's like thinking you write a book or you read a book and the words just arrange themselves in a perfect grammatical fashion which makes sense and tells a story. Of course it didn't. It took an author who agonized over the book to fine-tune it so it's a readable, enjoyable story. Or you listen to a piece of classical music, no one would think, you know, the musicians just picked up their trumpets and string instruments and just started jamming, and all of a sudden you have this classical masterpiece. Of course not. It took a composer to sit down with great thought and care to fine-tune the piece of music, and the musicians to practice and practice until they could perform it flawlessly. It's the same with our world. It didn't just come about by accident. The requirements for life are just so fine-tuned. It would have taken a loving and caring and powerful, intelligent designer to bring our world and our universe to the point where it can support life as we know it. So when science tries to do away with God, it's actually doing away with the answers to what a lot of their ideas are about, like the origin of life, the fine-tuned nature of our universe. You know, those things require an intelligent designer for the whole thing to work. You know, I guess I don't want to sound like I'm beating up on science. As I said at the start, I'm not. We owe a great debt to science. In fact, many of the well-known early scientists were Christians. You know, good science, after observations, good science will form a hypothesis. You know, something that they think is true. Then they'll test this hypothesis in a controlled environment, recording data, and making observations. And if the hypothesis is proven correct and can be repeated through the experimental processes, then something is proved as true. But this only works for things in the material creation. And it only works because the material creation has been ordered in such a way that good science can be done according to the methodical scientific method. You know, good science is possible because creation is ordered and not random. A random creation cannot become ordered on its own. You know, you don't just get order out of chaos without someone doing the ordering. Yeah, I've got 3 young kids. I know that. we need to do a lot of ordering. Creation is ordered because its creator designed it that way. And therefore, God makes good science possible. So God and science and good science are not enemies. They sit comfortably together. But science cannot disprove the existence of God because it's limited to the natural realm, whereas God is supernatural. And the final bit of evidence we'll talk about today is, again, mentioned in that video, objective moral standards. Take the 10 Commandments, for example. Let's run with the final 6 commandments. If you want to yell it out, just take yourself off mute. And who can tell me any of the final 6 commandments? You don't have to name them all, just maybe yell out one for me.
Honor your mother and father.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Honor your mother and father. Ellie said, do not steal.
Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't covet your neighbour's wife. Oh, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
No, that was the last one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Did anyone get do not bear false testimony? Yeah.
So not kill.
Yeah, not kill. Yeah. And so these are objective moral standards. Like our moral standards are changing in the West. There's no doubt about that. But when you look throughout most of human history, there is crossover throughout most cultures of these moral standards. You know, in most cultures, you know, you don't kill. In most cultures, you don't cheat on your wife, or it's not considered moral to do so. In most cultures, you would honor your mother and father, and so on and so forth. And this is the case even in the ancient world, before there was the internet, before there was air travel, before there was cross-pollination of the different cultures. Disparate cultures that had nothing to do with each other. There was a lot of crossover between these objective moral standards. That can only be because there is a supernatural moral lawgiver. So objective moral standards, again, is evidence that there is a supernatural God, an intelligent designer. So to summarize, science cannot disprove the existence of God. One, because of our own life experience. And two, science actually points towards the existence of God by showing us that whatever has a beginning has a cause. It shows us that DNA doesn't just come from nowhere. You know, you don't get nothing from nothing. You know, for there to be life, there needs to be a supernatural life giver. Evidence 3 from science shows us our world and universe is so fine-tuned to support life, it's impossible. But all of these cosmic forces could have come together just randomly to create what we have now. And we know God exists because of objective moral standards that have existed throughout human history. So if we have a conversation with somebody who has accepted this scientism worldview, either actively or passively, what can we do? How can we speak into that space using these 3 circles that we talked about at the start? Well, I think we can talk to them and say, look, actually, God designed the world good, very good, in fact. Even science itself actually points towards the fact that there needs to be an intelligent designer for what we have now. I know the world doesn't look perfect at the moment. That's because sin entered the world because of the actions of people, and then brokenness happened. Brokenness within nature, brokenness between humans, brokenness between humans and God. Okay, and you probably feel that in your own life. But the good news is, if you repent and believe in the gospel, in the death and resurrection of Jesus on your behalf, the broken relationship we have with God is mended, and it allows us to pursue and recover the good design God had for us originally as he creates us to be more like his son. And then one day we'll be in the new creation where the brokenness that we have now doesn't exist. So I think maybe that's one thought I have on how we can take this information about scientism and speak the gospel into that context. So as I conclude, science helps us understand how God's good creation works and points us to an intelligent designer who we know as our God. Our experience, science, and morality point us to the existence of God. God is the only explanation for how life began. Science doesn't have another reasonable explanation. Therefore, because of all of this, we can be confident that God exists. Let me stop my screen share so I can see all your beautiful faces again. So that sort of brings us to the end of the thoughts I have on does God exist? You know, I hope you feel a little more confident that, yeah, he does. You know, our life experience, science itself, and objective moral standards point to the fact that, yeah, God does exist. That's the most reasonable explanation for everything we have in this world and in this universe, is that there is an intelligent designer who created it this way. And so next week, what I'm hoping to do, now that, you know, we can establish that God does exist, we've got to think, well, does the Bible accurately represent this God? Is the Bible where we go to learn about this God? And so that's what we're going to have a look at next week. How can we be confident in the face of accusations that have been made against the inaccuracy of the Bible? How can we be confident that it is a true, accurate, and reliable representation of the God who created this world? And in the weeks to follow, so once we've established, yes, God exists, yes, we can trust the Bible is accurate and faithful, then we think, well, we need to think about living the way that God wants us to live. And so we're going to tackle issues such as easy issues like abortion and the LGBT movement. As Christians, how do we deal with that, and how do we speak the gospel into those sort of contexts? So I just want to open it up for maybe stick with me for another 5 to 10 minutes if you can, and let's have a discussion. Any thoughts, questions, comments? Again, I'm not an expert on science. I'm relying on the what other people tell me, and I think it's solid what I've been told. But thoughts, questions, comments, anyone, just unmute yourself if you've got something to say. And I encourage you to say something, someone, please.
I might just jump in there. I think often, a lot of people feel like they don't know much science, and especially if you're coming up to someone, that's sort of in that scientism, and they can throw facts at you. I think, maybe you don't even have to engage them on the science necessarily. As we've sort of seen, we know it's rational, at least, that there is a God, and hopefully we've seen that tonight. And so you can kind of get to those other issues like morality and those other things, and you can focus there. Because sometimes if you not feeling confident, you try and engage someone in a scientism debate, and then they start pulling out all these facts, you can get a bit overwhelmed. So that can be another alternative that you might feel a bit more comfortable with.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll build on that by saying, I think as non-science people, I guess we need to approach the scientific issues with a degree of humility, because we're not experts in that field. But I hope tonight at least has shown us, I guess, some of the areas which science can't adequately answer. Maybe we can, if we're having a conversation with someone, lovingly just ask them those questions and say, what would you have to say? Well, if God didn't create the world, the universe, well, it had to have a cause. What do you put forward? Not like a smart aleck, but just a humble way.
That's what I like. I've just been reading a book that Steve gave me to read. It's called Questioning Evangelism, and it's been really good because it's talking about that sort of not coming out like Steve's just given us a good spiel and all of that, but you wouldn't sit down and tell somebody this for 10 minutes and just like rave on at them. It's more so for us to feel confident, and then maybe like using questions and things when someone starts to say, oh, this is what I believe, then you can say to them, well, like Steve said, well, how do you figure that everything started? And maybe questioning them might help them to actually question themselves as well. And maybe,
Thanks, Ellie. That's a great point. And it's something I'm trying to get better at myself, is before I jump in and say what I want to get out there, is to try and ask some good questions and try and find out, if they're asking questions, try and find out what's behind the questions. Have they had a bad experience before? If so, hopefully they might open up to you about that, and spend a lot of time listening well. And then when it seems right and appropriate, maybe gently start to perhaps challenge some of the worldviews that they have. so that they might be able to see or help them discover for themselves some of the cracks in their worldview, so that we can get the gospel into those cracks and that they can see that there's a better story, which is Jesus. So, but yeah, asking good questions and listening well, very important. Thanks, Ellie.
Yeah, I was going to say two things that stand out for me. I mean, firstly, there's no big chasm between scientists and Christians, and I think we have to acknowledge that many very, very high level scientists are Christians and have even come to that position. I mean, you quoted one of them, I think, in that presentation, or maybe it was in the video, that there was one guy who came to that position through evidence based, like the evidence was pointing him to that. And John Lennox talks about that a lot. I just watched a video that he just did the other day, and he's a mathematician at Oxford University, and he's a really high level scientist and thinker, and he just doesn't see any contradiction between science and God, and a lot of people don't. And so I think one of our really basic things we can share, like if somebody has that assumption that, oh, surely scientists have all proven Christianity is wrong, or if people are sort of seeing there's this big disjunction, it's like, well, actually, no, there are a lot of scientists who are Christians or have become Christians because science has led them to that. So we don't have to be the most amazing scientists, but we can actually say that there are people, who are a lot smarter than us as well. And I think the other thing that you pointed out a few times too, Steve, is that scientism is a leap of faith. It's a great leap of faith. And John Lennox says this all the time. He says, he's trying to point out that atheists have to have faith as well, but they've got faith in their own position. They've got faith that in what they're saying, that there was no creator, that something came from nothing. And so it's just interesting that you have to have faith in something. You have to have a belief in something. So I think, maybe that's just a helpful thing to point out too. And I think when people really dig deep into that origin of the universe, and I always think about that. I look up into the sky and I think it'd be so much harder to believe we came from nothing. That's just a bigger leap of faith for me. So, I think that's just a real big one that maybe people haven't thought too much about either, and haven't thought much about the fact that no scientist has answered that question for themselves.
Yeah, I think sometimes people will try and say reason belongs to science and faith belongs to religion. But I would like to say reason and faith go together, and sometimes, as we've seen, faith and science go together as well. I don't think that there's you can reason out why you have the faith that you do. I think, don't let people put you off by saying religious people have faith and reason is better than faith. That's just not true.
God is the God of science, so he's the one that created everything and holds it all together. So we don't have anything to be ashamed of that we somehow, as that science doesn't go with Christianity. It goes perfectly with it.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
I was thinking in these discussions that you can have with people, it's often to gently lead people to the whole question of the meaning of life, to quote a good Monty Python thing, really the meaning of life. And I think that people are searching for a meaning in life, and, to look up in the stars and go, surely we're not alone. Surely this didn't just happen. But also, I know Jeff's often said, having, being a minister and having to attend hospitals when, say, people are dying, he said, on people's deathbeds, there are no atheists, because people are just wanting that meaning in life. which I think science ultimately can't provide.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. I'd like to say as well that when we have these discussions with people, like this may not be an issue for some of us, but for others it might be, is that it's not worth winning the argument for the sake of winning the argument. Arguments will push people away, whereas love will draw people in. So if it's just starting to become an argument, it's probably worth just backing off a little bit, at least for a while. If they believe in, say, evolution over creation, it's probably worth asking, what sort of evolution do you believe in? Are you talking about, life coming out of nothing? Or are you talking about what's called microevolution, where a cat becomes a different type of cat, or a dog becomes a different type of dog? Because there is, I believe, evidence for microevolution, but there is no evidence that, life came from nothing, or a dog became a bird, or whatever. It's worth asking as well. Well, okay, you believe in evolution. To be honest, there's other Christians that do as well. Do you think evolution automatically rules out God? And they might say, oh, well, actually, yeah, no, I don't think it does. In which case, we don't even need to have that sort of argument over, evolution, creation, and that sort of thing. So, any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
Except that I lost you on the screen before completely.
Oh, did you? Could you still hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you, but I couldn't see you.
Okay.
We couldn't see you either.
Yeah.
So,
We just went somewhere.
yeah.
Just out of curiosity, could other people see me as well as hear me? You could.
Yeah.
Okay. I must have done something when I shared the screen. I
Yeah,
lost
that's when
you.
it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was hoping you were all still there. If not, I was talking to myself.
Could hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could hear you.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah. All right.
Sorry,
Bro-
just
mate.
one last sort of point. I think scientism obviously is that it's applying science past what it is good for. It's pushing it out, and that's where we kind of get these fake elements. And then when you sort of think about Romans 1, when it's sort of, everyone has in general revelation the knowledge of God. It's not always the case, but often that pushing it out is that kind of denial. So yeah, having that kind of in the back of your mind as well, that often science is being pushed beyond its limits, and helping people to sort of see that is helpful.
Yeah. Actually, thanks, Bryce. That was something I was going to mention as well. But we were talking about how science itself points to God, perhaps unwittingly, but it points to God. And it's very much like Romans 1, I believe, where it talks about how the heavens themselves declare the glory of God. So again, it's a case where science and the Bible can sit comfortably together in that way, but creation does point to God. Yeah. All right, folks. Well, I think that's probably pretty much all I've got. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. It is really nice to see your faces. I'm really starting to miss church, actually. It's been about 7 or 8 weeks now. So, so it is nice to see your faces. And, thanks so much for joining in. And I think if you found it helpful and useful, please join in next week as well. Same time, 7:30 on Wednesday. And again, if you found it helpful and useful, maybe invite someone else from church to join in. Well, I think I said last week when we were doing the evangelism training, sometimes when the minister is encouraging people to get involved with something, it can just become white noise because we're always doing it. often it can have more power, I think, when it comes from someone in the congregation. So it was really good. It was helpful. Why don't you join in? And, you know, if you heard anything tonight that you found was useful and helpful, you know, chuck it on WhatsApp just so other people can be aware of it as well. And that in itself might encourage others to join in and benefit too. If you do that, please leave my name out of it. You don't need, and I don't want you to say how great Steve is. Just if you found something helpful, just say, did the training, found this helpful. You know, maybe you might
do all that. I can't put it on WhatsApp because I don't know how. Oh,
You can do it the old-fashioned way with your mouth.
I think ring, telephone.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. Old school way.
Old school.
Yeah.
But it was really helpful, Steve. Just very succinct the way that you presented that. So thank you.
Thank you for all the work you put into it too. Obviously, a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but it's like we're at a time. This has been something that's been sort of swimming around in my head for about 18 months to do, but I've just never had the time to sit down and do it in any meaningful way. But I think with our current situation, it sort of has given me the time. So, you know, while there's things I don't like about this period we're living through at the moment, I guess one silver lining is it's given me a bit of time to do this. So with thanks to God.
Yeah. Steve, do you have the notes? Are you going to be able to send them around and maybe the links to those videos as well?
I can send the notes around and the link to that video. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
That would be great.
No worries. I will do that over the next day or two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Bye, Ellie. Bye, Steve.
Bye.
Thanks for lining up for their COVID injection tonight. James and Dan.